In 1945, Japan lay in ruins. Its cities were burned to ash, its factories flattened, its empire erased from the map. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were radioactive scars. On the earth, Tokyo was a skeleton of steel and silence. Food was scarce, inflation was rampant, and morale was non-existent. For the first time in centuries, Japan had no emperor in power, no army to defend it, and no identity beyond defeat. It had lost not just a war, but its illusion of invincibility. And yet, within a single generation, that same nation would rise to dominate global trade. Its cars would outlast American ones. Its electronics would outsmart European ones. Its companies would become symbols of precision, discipline, and design. The world would call it an economic miracle. But Japan's recovery wasn't a miracle. It was an economic revolution, carefully engineered by people who understood something few nations ever do. That wealth, isin, tea, rebuilt through luck, but through discipline. To understand Japan's rise, you have to start with its fall. The Japan that surrendered in 1945 was a shattered economy with no functioning industry. More than 40% of its urban areas were destroyed. Half its merchant fleet was gone. Industrial output had collapsed to less than a tenth of pre-war levels. Millions were homeless. Thousands were starving. And its currency, the yen, was practically worthless, devoured by hyperinflation. When General Douglas MacArthur and the Allied occupation forces arrived, their initial goal wasn't to rebuild Japan. It was to neutralize it. The plan was to dismantle its war machine, both military and economic. The old industrial giants, known as Zaibatsu, Mitsubishi, Mitsui, Sumitomo, were broken up. But as the Cold War began, America's goals changed. The Soviet Union was expanding, and China had just turned communist. Suddenly, a weakened Japan looked less like justice and more like a liability. Washington realized the best defense against communism wasn't bombs, it was prosperity. Japan would be rebuilt, not as a military empire, but as a capitalist fortress in Asia. The foundation of Japan's economic miracle began not in its factories, but in its philosophy. Instead of the chaos of free markets, Japan built what economists later called a guided economy. The government wouldn't directly control production, but it would direct its flow. The engine of that direction was a new institution, the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, or MITI. Its bureaucrats weren't politicians. They were technocrats who saw capitalism as something to be managed, not worshipped. They funneled resources into steel, shipbuilding, automobiles, and electronics. Every yen of investment had a purpose. But Japan's true genius was blending Western technology with Eastern discipline. Companies were reorganized into kiretsu, networks of firms linked through shared ownership and long-term cooperation. Each kiretsu had a bank at its center, providing steady financing. These weren't competitors in the Western sense. They were industrial families. On the factory floor, another revolution was happening. The traditional Japanese work ethic fused with modern management to create something new: lifetime employment, seniority-based pay, and collective loyalty. Workers didn't just have jobs, they belonged to their companies. This created a stable, motivated workforce focused on improvement. The concept of Kasan's continuous improvement became the moral backbone of Japan's recovery. It was simple. Every process can be refined, every defect eliminated, every second saved. This obsession with perfection turned Japanese manufacturing into the envy of the world. By 1968, Japan had overtaken West Germany to become the world's second-largest economy. The transformation was staggering. In just 2 decades, Japan had moved from starvation to surplus, from ashes to automation. The whole nation moved like a single machine. And it wasn't just internal strategy. The Korean War in the early 1950s turbocharged this model. American troops needed supplies, and Japanese factories became the arsenal behind the front lines. Billions of dollars in U.S. military orders poured in, reviving heavy industry overnight. Through the 1950s and 60s, Japan's growth defied comprehension. The bullet train, the Shinkansen, launched in 1964 for the Tokyo Olympics, signaling to the world, that Japan was the future. By the late 1970s, Japanese steel outcompeted American steel. Japanese cars outlasted American cars. Sony, Panasonic, and Toshiba redefined global electronics. To the world, Japan looked unstoppable. But every system has its flaw, and Japan's was too much success. The same coordination that built its wealth also built its complacency. By the 1980s, Japan's boom had turned into a bubble. Asset prices soared to absurd levels. The Imperial Palace grounds in Tokyo were said to be worth more than all of California. But bubbles always burst. When the Bank of Japan raised interest rates in 1989, stocks collapsed and real estate plummeted. Trillions in paper wealth evaporated. The 1990s became Japan's lost decade. Growth vanished. The same disciplined system that fueled Japan's rise now trapped it in stagnation. It had built a machine so perfect it couldn't evolve. Still, calling it a failure misses the point. Japan's so-called lost decades weren't a collapse. They were stability at a high altitude. Its citizens remained among the healthiest, safest, and best educated on Earth. The miracle hadn't disappeared, it had matured. But Japan's story is a warning. Its rise was proof that prosperity can be manufactured, but also that even success must evolve or decay. The Japanese economic miracle was never about factories or exports. It was about philosophy. It asked a simple question every nation should ask. What is the purpose of growth? For Japan, the answer was collective survival. But survival, onseachibed, demands evolution. History doesn't repeat, but patterns do. And Japan's post-war transformation remains one of the clearest mirrors we have. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.